Welcome back to PWRN. Ann Arbor, Michigan is the broadcast home of PWRN, the world in your hands. And this morning we have a very special guest on Lillian's Interviews. His name is Travis Lloyd, and he wrote a book called Overcoming Emotional Trauma. So, good morning, Travis. How are you doing this bright, cloudy day?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm doing quite well. I appreciate you taking me on. I'm not sure what the weather's like where you're at, but the weather where I'm at is surprisingly sunny.
We had surprisingly sunny sort of yesterday, mixed with 1.5 inches of snow and a nice ice storm. So my husband filled hot water into a canister, took the ladder, and made several trips to the roof.
That sounds horrible, actually.
And pour the water down so that it wouldn't accumulate.
Yeah. Well, we had some pretty intense cold weather last week where it was kind of like I walk outside in the morning. I go to the gym every morning to just make sure my mental stays in balance. And I walked out at about 6:45 in the morning, and it's one of those things where the wind hit your face and you just lose your breath type of thing.
Yes.
And we're above the freezing level this week, so it feels like kind of a summer out there right now. That I don't have to have my entire face and everything.
I understand. Ann Arbor set 2 records last week, -14 and -15.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not jealous.
You don't want some of this nice weather?
No, I've only been up in that neck of the woods once in my life. It was actually this past summer, and it was up on the lake, and it was pretty beautiful, but still not super, super warm where I felt like I could get in the water, you know?
Wow, I don't know. They jump into the water up here for charity. In fact, they had several washer parties last week when it was like 5 degrees above zero.
Oh, well, I'll leave that to them. I'll write a check.
Absolutely. And speaking of letting other people handle it, that is not what you do. You go out and actually work with people. And
yes, that's true.
Recently you told me that you previously had worked with the police department, working with kids and or adults who had emotional trauma that overshadowed their behavior.
Yeah. So, well, I guess to give your viewers and listeners a bit of a perspective, one of the reasons why my career has been so successful is because I offer kind of a dual perspective to both youth and adults, and all ages of youth and students. One of those perspectives is the fact that I grew up in foster care and had experienced group homes and being institutionalized myself and being placed on psychotropic medications at a young age, as well as having family members who struggled with very similar things for many, many years of their lives. But then the other perspective, how I like to say I offer a dual perspective, is the fact that I worked in both hospital settings and community-based mental health settings, ranging from inpatient mental health to emergency departments and community-based work as a life coach. And then later on, the job that you're mentioning, when I worked as a mental health mobile crisis worker with the local law enforcement in the 2 surrounding counties. And basically, everything that I realized, and it was one of the things that motivated me and inspired me to write my book, Overcoming Emotional Trauma, because I realized that people from all walks of life, from all demographics, from all backgrounds, from all financial or social statuses, they all end up struggling with the same things. And it boils down to being able to overcome, move on, and find ways to live healthier and happier lives. And in doing so, it takes developing deeper relationships. You know, when I went out on cases with law enforcement, one of the things that I ran into was they every time there was somebody who was suicidal on a bridge, threatening to jump, or if somebody was in a group home, or if somebody was a college student, overwhelmed with the stress of college, as many people get, but don't talk about it. Anytime I ran into it, it boiled down to being overwhelmed, stress, and having an inability to actually, cope with that through having healthy relationships that walk you through it.
Would you consider trauma from emotions PTSD because they carry it with them for most of their life, even after they get over it? There are reoccurrences of what may or may not happen when somebody pushes a button or they encounter something that sets them back into that previous behavior.
Sure. And that's one of the things that I like to advocate for is actually moving away, and it's okay to use them because it's common knowledge, but moving away from the terminology of the DSM diagnoses of PTSD, bipolar, depression, all those types of things, because really what it boils down to, exactly what you're talking about, being triggered and understanding those triggers. And that really lies into the idea of understanding what's a big movement now, and was a very huge longitudinal 17-year study done by a couple of physicians in California called the ACE study that's now being utilized to provide evidence-based practice all the way from a federal down to the state level, and then implementing in community-based areas. And that practice is the idea of what's called trauma-informed care practices. And so I really like to say, instead of placing a label and identifying with a mindset of dealing with negative things of the past and how that impacts you today, I like to say it's an important thing to instead become more aware of those situations and the things that are triggering in order to desensitize, find more healthy things to focus on instead of kind of regurgitating the negative things of the past.
So you're teaching people actually get rid of their emotional baggage, whether it's been emotional baggage that's been handed down by previous generations, or you're creating your new baggage because it's something that your parents or relatives or even your friends or outside people have managed to catch on to, and therefore can either put you further back in whatever the therapy you're working or help you forward, depending. So how does a person learn how to catch that before it escalates and gets out of control?
Well, I'll say from personal experience, I could bring up many different case studies and examples from when I was working more regularly. But for me personally, it came with identifying the lowest of lows in my life, the moments when I felt I was in this deja vu of, gosh, I feel like I've been here before. I feel like I've been sitting down in this slump before. I feel like I've been here for too long, or it happens too often. And if you just unconsciously walk through life being upset about the times that you're upset, it really makes it difficult to identify why you're being upset. And so there's actually a chapter in my book called Always Ask Why. And there's two perspectives of that chapter. And one is being able to ask why you're feeling certain ways, so that you can be consciously aware of it, and then work towards finding ways to change your perspective in those situations, and in turn changing your mindset and your responses to those situations. And the goal is to switch from reacting to responding consciously. The other perspective of that chapter, Always Ask Why, is a lot of times with our friends or family members or colleagues or clients, if that person gives us a response that would be perceived as a negative response to us, a lot of times it might be because they're being triggered and are unaware of their what's triggering them, and so they give us a reaction. But then what oftentimes happens is, and which makes it difficult to get along with people in the workplace, which makes it difficult to get along with classmates or professors, or I mean anyone. If we are able to be aware and ask why somebody is reacting that way, instead of taking it personally and automatically reacting back to them negatively, and in turn precipitating the same cycle, nothing gets better, and we end up re-traumatizing each other. But if we, as the outsider of that person who's reacting, can take a look at that situation, say, man, when that girl told me off because she didn't want to be so close to me in this dating relationship, maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe I need to say, why did she do that in such a negative way? Why was she going through that? Was it because she's been raped in the past? Was it because she had an abusive father? Was it, kind of understanding why instead of just placing blame and reacting?
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. When you work with younger children, do you also provide therapy for the parents as well? Because it's the interaction between the two can become volatile. So I would think that you would want to work with the parents or the relatives or the teachers or whoever is around that young child to teach them how to condition their behavior so they don't set up flares in the young child.
Sure. So I'll give you two examples. One is there's been some work done in the realm of mental health in different countries, and I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe Switzerland is a country that's done a lot of progressive work in the world of mental health services, all the way to the point of the work that they've done in shifting the paradigm of their mental health services has almost, if not completely, eradicated such diagnoses as schizophrenia. And the way that they've done that is creating what's called wraparound services, where instead of labeling that person who's demonstrating psychotic behaviors, they identify that there's probably a reason why behind what's happening in their life. And the only way to support them is for family members and the people closest to them to be able to have an understanding of the reasoning behind those behaviors. So instead of just putting that person on drugs and labeling them and then putting them in a system for the rest of their life, they actually require that their family members will go through this therapy and have a deeper understanding of the behaviors and how to respond to them instead of react to them. And that in turn has nearly eradicated the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And as you're saying, in my own work, I'll give you a very precise example of one of the youth emergency shelters that I got called to frequently when I was still working. And in that shelter, there were, I mean, of course, there's young kids, teenagers, and they're all traumatized. They're all there because they, have something in their life that is not right. They're unstable. They've got parents who are doing drugs or dealing drugs. They're being abused in one way or another. They're being neglected. Something is wrong in their life. And a lot of times what I would notice is their behaviors, rightfully so, would be kind of like everyone would call them crazy. And to the naked eye, yes, that can be considered crazy when they're acting out, when they're throwing chairs, when they're screaming at people, when they're threatening to kill people. But what would happen is I would walk in to the shelter and the staff people would be telling me about how bad this kid is. And I would realize, look in their eyes and their presence and the way I can almost see their heart beating out of their chest because they're so upset and they're reacting to this kid and almost taking it personally. What I realized is I would spend 5 or 10, maybe 15 minutes talking with the kid, and the kid would end up, okay, yeah, I get it. I shouldn't have done that. And yeah, I'm just doing that because I'm so used to being controlled and abused that I'm afraid they're going to respond the same way to me. And so I fight back, and then I go talk to the staff, and what I end up doing a lot of times with spending more time with the staff in teaching them how to better understand the behaviors in order to respond appropriately. And I feel just like in Switzerland, that's one of the most important things. And I feel like that should be done in everything. Now, by no means would I say I provide therapy because I'm not a therapist, but I provide the coaching and guidance that it takes to have a better understanding of behaviors.
It's almost like you're putting everybody out in timeout. Go to your respective corners and think about what you've done. Because to me, it seems like one of the things you're doing is trying to get people to stop and think and reflect what led to this type of behavior. And the only way you can do it is actually separate everybody and put them in their respective space so that there's quiet, and that will calm down everybody. So instead of getting engaged in a physical, and you can get engaged in a physical fight without using your fists. It's called emotional blackmail. And I've been privy to that. My mother
Sure.
was master
Sure.
of that one. It really seems like it would make sense to me for people who are volunteering to become foster parents or to work in some of these institutions to take this type of program. I know that the police are required to take certain type of programs now in order to deal with different types of behavior. You don't see it much,
Yeah.
but I do know that they are required to take sensitivity programs and other programs similar to that, so they don't go and kill a homeless man for whatever reason they had.
For having a tent on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I would venture to say that I would question the efficacy of some of those programs and the prominence of some of them. And I agree. The idea of having overcoming emotional trauma utilized as a curriculum is actually already being done. And I didn't ever intend for it to be that way. But people have already been requesting that I create a workbook as a curriculum to go hand in hand with this book, to the point of I did a tour with the Department of Justice in South Dakota to launch my book for the first time this past year. And at the end of the tour, I had a therapist come up to me and she said, I do a group therapy session with teens once a week, and we're going to start using your book. Because she'd already started reading it during the conference. And she said, we're going to start using your book one chapter at a time on our weekly sessions to use as a guideline for the therapy. And I had a teen girls rehab program in Texas when I spoke for a foster and adoptive parent conference, statewide conference in Texas, just about a month ago. And the director of that teen rehab program for girls said, we're doing the same thing. And they're actually, they've committed to purchasing 50 books every 6 months so that every new group of girls who goes through the program is able to receive the book and use it as a resource and inspiration for moving forward and focusing on the positive instead of on the negative.
I think it's a good idea. I think that parents and teachers really do not have the, I should say, equipment to deal with a child who's been emotionally abused in some way. Yeah. Because usually that behavior follows them all the way up to being a parent and then all the way up to being a grandparent. I remember my father was an abused child, and he told me one or two stories of what his grandparents did to him, and I was horrified. And he says, you have to understand that up until recently, children and wives were considered property, and you can do anything you want. So has the social conscience across the board changed their thinking of how they're treating other people? Because I'm pretty sure that's hand in hand with overcoming the emotional trauma that is now occurring.
Yeah. And it's in the whole premise of overcoming the emotional trauma, understanding a deeper reasoning to behaviors, being able to forgive, being able to let go, being able to be at peace with oneself and reaching a higher level of consciousness and self-awareness. It all ties in together. And I think one of the simplified ways to explain that really boils down to responding to situations not in an intellectual way, not in a way that's analytical, not in a way that's in your head, but simply using your heart.
Your heart, yes. And I got to tell you, it only took me 60 years to figure that one out and become at peace with myself and recognize that you're never going to win with some people, so don't even bother.
Yeah.
And it really relieves you of a lot of that garbage, of the emotions.
So true. And in all honesty, it hurts my heart when I hear people say it took me 60 years to figure that out. I feel very, very fortunate to have figured it out in approximately 30 years. I feel very blessed. And my, it's even more sad to me because I know my mother, she was the victim of many generational cycles, much like you were speaking, and I and my sister ended up being victims of negative generational cycles, and from both sides. My sister and I have different fathers, and so we both had different generational cycles coming at different angles. And my mother right now is actually 3 semesters away from a double major in sociology and psychology, and she's in her 50s right now, and she's getting it, and she's educating herself, and she's moving forward towards that self-actualization, towards being able to be at peace without being angry at the world, angry for all of the things that she has a right to be angry about, but being at peace with it enough to move on. And so it's sad to me to know that she ended up kind of a victim of the mental health system and on psychotropic medications, and pretty much, and I know she feels like she had about 17 years of her life just taken away, living in a snow, to the point where, she was no longer my mother. She wasn't the same person once she got put on all those meds and went into the mental health system. And it's kind of cool just because within the last few months, we've been able to experience what it's like to have a mother-son relationship for the first time since before my parents divorced when I was about 8 or 9.
It makes a difference. Do you often wonder whether or not the reason why this kind of generational baggage is put down is because of the type of heritage, if you want to put it that way, the Italians, the Jews, the Irish, they all have their baggage from the old country, and they seem to have brought it with them when they came to the USA, and they continue to contribute to it. Now, I didn't do that to my son. I said, you're going to collect your own garbage and baggage. I'm just not going to do it to you. And I didn't. And he continually thanks me because he can see his friends burdened emotionally with the stuff.
Yep. So I'm glad you brought that up. And actually, that's one of the things that I've had a heightened awareness of, even since I wrote this book, which was released a few months back. But in that last few months, I went through some personal growth related to having a deeper understanding of my ability to connect in a romantic relationship and potentially reach my goals of having a healthy romantic relationship and potentially being married and have children in the future. And so I went to a spiritual counselor a couple of months ago who just walked me through having a true intimate relationship with the child inside of me that was damaged. And accepting it and being and allowing myself to move on. And what he did was he made me aware of the generational cycles that come from various cultural backgrounds. And he said some of the issues that I've been struggling with, even since writing this book, are very, very indicative of the same issues that stem from Germany, which is where my maternal grandparents are from. And I realized that a lot of the cycles that I was putting myself through were the same exact cycles that were very, very common practice in Germany, and very, very common practice for my biological grandfather, who I'm sure may have been a person at heart, but may have done a lot of negative things that I'm not even aware of. And that's one of the things that, like, I've learned the importance of living a true, authentic life and being open and honest 100% about all of the good and bad about me. I've always been afraid to do that. I've always kind of been, I went through a men's group recently to learn how to be more open and authentic, and actually put it into practice with accountability, which is super, super important. And I realized that I was being 97% authentic and open and honest 100% of the time. And 3% of the time, 100% of the time, I was shameful. I was afraid to be open. I was afraid to be honest. I was afraid I would be rejected. And that goes all the way up into within the last 6 months when I had been dating somebody, and I was afraid to just be open and honest because I was afraid she wouldn't accept me. And so now it's to the point, and I talk about some of this stuff in my book, some of the real negative things that have been cycles in my own family that a lot of people I found can relate to. But ever since I've been completely open and honest about it and saying, hey, I really struggled with the idea of comfort and feeling comfort, since I didn't get comforted from my family and the support from my family that I felt I needed. I supplemented with casual sex. I supplemented with womanizing, and I didn't know it at a young age, and those cycles just continue to perpetuate to the point of in all honesty, I want to be open and honest about this, because there's so many people out there who are probably going through the same thing. And it's something that really precipitated when I was transitioning into adulthood and trying to identify who I was without having a background or a family supporting that. And
Yes.
you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I told my son when he was around 14, when he was 15, I gave him a condom to put in his wallet. I said, accidents happen. Now and I'm a single parent, so I sent him down to the local drugstore to ask the male druggist down there how to put on a condom and what he needed to be on the lookout for, because I couldn't tell him. And I said, sweetheart, putting notches on your belt of how many women you slept with is not a mark of maturity. Yeah. I said, if you only have one notch on the belt, I said, that shows you're respectful of women's feelings and how they feel. It takes two to tangle. And if you're not ready emotionally to tangle, then don't do it.
Yep.
You have to be true to yourself. You have to live with yourself.
And it makes it really difficult to live with yourself when you're doing that. And when you later on have a heightened awareness of the fact that you, as a traumatized individual, have then essentially been using the opposite sex and traumatizing them and causing them the same pain and anguish. And when you're in the midst of it, like for me, I was not aware of it. I was never taught. I was never guided. And so I did not know how that impacted my psyche subconsciously. I did not know how pornography impacted my psyche subconsciously, how it changed my view and expectations of human interactions, how it made it easier to have casual sex or to use pornography instead of investing emotionally in a potential relationship, because that's hard. It's difficult. It's a challenge, and it takes time, patience, and respect. And it's much easier to do the other stuff. But in the end, you always feel dirty afterwards. You
feel used.
Regret it. Yeah. And even if you're the one doing the using, you end up feeling used as well, because you've invested something that's supposed to be saved for someone special and placed it in the wrong place.
Yes. I mean, my son told me that all his friends indulged in casual sex, and they would date somebody and say, this is the love of my life. And then the next week they would be with another lady. And my son turned around to me and he says, I really want to thank you for being upfront and frank with me about this. And I said, well, they run the risk of VD and gonorrhea, and you don't want to mess with that. I said, it does make you sterile, And I said, for the other stuff, if you're not ready emotionally, I said, you're barely doing well in high school because you're afraid to take responsibility for your own acts, like doing homework. So if you're having trouble with homework, I can't imagine what you're going to do if you go to bed with a girl.
Yeah.
And I showed him how, when he was 12, I took him to the local diner. We ordered everything a 12-year-old loved. And in the midst of eating that, I showed him physically with my fingers how a man and a woman made love. And he said that made him feel sick to his stomach every time he contemplated it, until he found the right one. He said, I never did it because you nauseated me so much. And I said, but that's the way it's done. And any kid that's raised on a farm or a ranch, they'll tell you.
They'll tell you what?
They'll tell you how sex is done. Come on. They see all the animals do it all the time. Especially when their father has to reach in and bring out the baby.
Oh, sure.
I was brought up in the 50s where sex was considered taboo. You didn't talk about it. Your parents didn't talk about it to you. When it came to menstruation, mom handed you a pamphlet or the back of a Codex box. That was the closest you got to a sex talk. Yeah. I did not want my son to learn it on the streets. And because he came from a single parent family, and I was told to my face by my ex-brother that when he would be 9, he would join a gang, and by the time he was 12, he would be dead. and I wanted to prove him wrong.
Yeah. Well, and when I first got started in everything, that's one of the things that I used to kind of allow my story to help shine on the importance of overcoming. Even before I ever wrote the book, Overcoming Emotional Trauma, if you look at my promotional video on my website, travisloyd.net, you'll see the very first video talks about some of the stereotypes and stigmas that I struggled to overcome as a young person and going through high school, when there were people who literally told me I was more likely to be dead or in jail before I graduated from high school. And you know, that little fire under me, but that fire oftentimes, you know, anytime that fire got dim, I was placed in a very susceptible situation with limited support, and those negative thoughts and those negative expectations and negative stigmas would perpetuate me saying, "Hey, that's what everyone expects of me. I might as well start stealing.
That's what I kept him away from.
Casual sex." You know what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly.
So it's so important to have, and it's one of the things that I use in my speeches. I'm actually finishing an article about it today for a foster care magazine. And the article is called Just One Person. It's also the title of one of my keynotes that I do for child serving agencies. And it's the importance of how one person can have a super humongous impact on somebody's life, whether it's positive or negative. And just one situation, one comment negatively can be imprinted, tattooed in the back of somebody's brain. And right when they're starting to feel down, that reminds them of how stupid they are. That reminds them of how low they're expected to perform. But on the other side, if you've got one person in your life who just reminds you of how great you are and how capable you are and how you, no matter where you come from or where you want to go, it's possible to get where you want to go. And you just have to remind yourself that no matter what you're stuck in, you can pull out of it. And the way I look at it is if somebody of similar intelligence or less intelligence than yourself is able to accomplish one act that pushes you in a positive direction, gets you a better job, gets you a better education, gets you a better opportunity, teaches you how to have healthier relationships. If somebody with similar or less education or intelligence capabilities is able to do it, then you can too. And it's just a matter of finding the mentors in your life, the people that you can follow online, the people who have already done it and doing what they've done. There's nobody in this world that has not already had someone else already live their life. It's a matter of seeing how those people overcame it and following the same pathway.
Absolutely. So we're going to have to wrap it up. I'll definitely have you come back again, Travis, because there's a lot of untapped information and what I would call taboo type information, because people are not really encouraged to get in touch with their emotions. In fact, they're taught to run from it. That's the general message. So could you please tell everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web, any upcoming speaking engagements or working with different state departments to clean house, and anything else that you feel is relevant and would be useful to the person who's listening?
Sure. Well, as far as upcoming projects, I am booked in several states, but most of the organizations that I go and speak for are, private continuing education things. But I am always looking for different opportunities to do other things in the same cities, whether it's TV or radio interviews. So I will be in the following several months. I'll be in Colorado and Denver doing a book signing with Barnes & Noble and doing a foster care conference. I'll be in Pennsylvania. I'll be in North Carolina. And those are the prominent ones I can think of right now. I know there's a few others, but I'm always looking for different opportunities while I'm in the area, and I don't mind staying a couple extra days in order to meet cool people. As far as getting in touch, I'm always happy to connect with people on Facebook or Twitter. It's on Facebook, it's Travis Loyd Speaks. On Twitter, it's just at Travis Loyd, TravisLloyd. Or you can simply Google my name, it's Travis Lloyd. My website, travisloyd.net, for any booking inquiries. And if you just Google Overcoming Emotional Trauma, you'll find it on Amazon, or visit overcomingemotionaltrauma.com. And there's also a Facebook for Overcoming Emotional Trauma, where I post free quotes to inspire people on a regular basis.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this wraps it up for Lillian's interview. Like Travis, if you want to hear this interview all over again, you can go over to twitter.com/PWR Network. You can go over to facebook.com/PWR Network LLC, or you can go over to https://passionateworldradionetwork.com. Find his vid there, or you can go over to YouTube and look for PWR Network. Thank you all very much for listening. And this is a quote I use quite often, and it can be applied to almost anything. So listen up. To become successful, one must put themselves in the paths of giants. Thank you all very much for listening, and have a great day.